Welcome to the Superstar Communicator podcast. My name is Susan Heaton-Wright, a leading impact, speaking and communications expert. My aim is to show you how to make an impact so you will be heard, listened to and respected for career success. Listen weekly to the podcast and go to our website, superstarcommunicator.com. Here at Superstar Communicator, we are celebrating and highlighting Black History Month, which in October every year is part of the culture in the United Kingdom. And I'm absolutely delighted to have Aisha Suleiman, who is an award-winning diversity and inclusion advocate, consultant and founder. She is an ideal person for us to talk about Black History Month and for me as a white ally to really learn about how we can support Black and brown colleagues, friends, people in our community. Her company is The Inclusive Culture, which helps organisations to achieve their diversity, inclusion and business goals through effective employee networks as part of their journey towards a more inclusive workplace. She's also a board member of the Rugby Football League's Inclusion Board, which supports the delivery of Rugby League's inclusion, equality and anti-discrimination plan and provides guidance on all inclusion matters in Rugby League. And she also has a podcast, The World in Her Words, which inspires Black women and women of colour to take control of their careers through sharing strategies, advice and inspirational stories. Now, this was recorded earlier this year and she has got loads of content and tips, and I'm absolutely delighted that she is starting our Black History Month feature. So welcome, Aisha.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Susan. I think it's going to be great.
So tell me about your journey. You are in a corporate background and you are a vocal leader. That's the right thing to say, vocal leader, making sure that people like me are aware of Black issues and the
Yeah.
challenges you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So founder as well. So I started my company, The Inclusive Culture, and my goal is to help organizations reach their diversity, inclusion, and also their business goals through employee networks or employee resource groups. Because I think that a lot of organizations are not really tapping into the potential of employee networks. And having started the Black Employee Network at Amazon in the UK, I've sort of seen firsthand the value that employee networks can bring in terms of, raising issues, as you said, of different people from different groups, really, really trying to hold the business accountable in terms of diversity and inclusion, educating allies, also even working on initiatives to help the business build more inclusive products, which can then help them increase their revenue because then they get to reach a different audience. So I feel like a lot of companies are still relying on employee networks in terms of just events, and they're not really seeing, hey, you can actually work with employee networks if you want to hire diverse talent, you want to retain your talent, you want to build more inclusive products, you want them to help you, reach some of your business goals. They can help you do all of that. So yeah, I'm kind of on a mission to help organizations realize that. So yeah.
It's so interesting that you say that at the moment, the way that it works is events.
Hmm.
And yet I've been doing some work for International Women's Day, which was Choose to Challenge.
Yeah.
And in the next week, I've got 3 virtual workshops where we're discussing how we can choose to challenge
Yeah.
over various issues within organizations. How would you tap into that?
Mhm. Tap into it in what sense?
In doing it in a way that will be impactful,
Mhm.
but people feel safe
Mhm.
sharing their experiences.
I would say with workshops, keep them small. So try and keep them as intimate as possible. So, for example, I facilitate I'm Remarkable. So that was developed by Google. And the whole point of that is to help women and people from underrepresented groups to develop their confidence in terms of self-promotion. Because sometimes due to, cultural factors or different things, we don't self-promote as much. And this is actually detrimental to your career. Now, what I really like about those sessions is it's normally like about 12 to 15 people. And I find that when it's smaller sessions, people tend to open up a lot more. And also, when you start the session, just setting the scene and saying, hey, this is a safe space. If someone shares something in this room, don't go and, tell someone else about it unless maybe you check with the person and they're okay with it. So I
Yes.
think there's that. And I think also being vulnerable yourself. So when you also share your story, I think it also helps people feel like they can open up, because I can't tell you how many times, I've shared something that's happened to me and then someone is like, "Wait, that also happened to me too. I thought I was the only one, or I thought, I caused it somehow, or that there was something wrong with me." And then it's like, actually, that happens to a lot of us. So, yeah, I think, being brave and being vulnerable and open, that can really help. And then I think with workshops as well, call to action that someone can implement immediately, right? So
Yes.
when they leave the session, it's like, okay, what do you want them to do right now? Because I think giving people that one small step that they can do immediately can help to keep the momentum going.
Oh, some very good tips there. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate
Mhm,
because sometimes I hear people say, well, you know, everything's okay with my company. We're making a profit. Why should we worry
mhm,
about having these groups
mhm.
where people can express their feelings? Because everything's happy. We're all happy here.
Well, I don't know about that. What I would say is if you want to know what's wrong with your organization, I always say this, go talk to your employee networks, right? Because they will tell you the true story. So if you think everything is all happy, because the thing is, with surveys, they're anonymous and they're supposed
Yeah,
to be, but a lot of employees still don't trust them
yeah.
because it's that whole thing of the big bad, corporate man. They think that maybe you will somehow trace the results back to them, so they might not be as forthcoming. Now, I think with people who run employee networks, I think the reason why they've set it up is because usually they want to make a change. They've seen something and they're like, okay, don't quite like this. Let me see what I can do rather than just complaining about it. When you speak to them, they will tell you the real story. Right. So even if you think everything is great, set them up then. Let's
Yeah.
see. That's the first thing I would say. And I would say in terms of organizations, always take the proactive approach. Don't react. Especially with like last year with, the Black Lives Matter protests, a lot of companies were then reacting because they were holding all these listening sessions with their employees. Now, if they'd had employee networks already, they would have already known what was wrong and probably taken steps to try and fix it. So a lot of them were reacting and think and saying, "Oh, I didn't know there was an issue." But you should always be proactive and think, "Okay, even if I think things are great, how can I still make sure and just find out?"
And there's huge value in that, isn't there?
Yeah,
You said at the beginning about retaining talent, about
absolutely.
making people feel valued,
Hmm.
and implementing change if you need to.
Yeah.
It's a no brainer.
Mhm.
Now, I noticed that you are involved in the rugby league. Goodness me.
Yes, yeah. So that all came about beginning of the year. I was appointed, and it's very interesting because I don't know so much about rugby league. I mean, obviously now I've started to do my research and looked into it, and it's quite interesting the history of it and how it all came about. But I think one thing I learned from that experience is, when I saw the position, I was like, oh, imposter syndrome started coming up. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
what do you know about rugby league? And then the other voice was like, yeah, but you know about inclusion. And then
yeah,
the other voice was like, yeah, but not in rugby league. And then I started thinking, actually, when I think about all the people that I speak to across different companies when it comes to inclusion, Susan, it's the same issue. It's like different finance, tech, whatever industry it is, you talk to them and it's the same thing.
yeah.
And this is why we say a lot of these issues are systemic, right? Because it's not one-offs, and that's why there's so many similarities. And so the other voice won, and she said, well, you know about inclusion, and actually maybe the fact that you don't know so much about rugby league is actually going to bring a different perspective.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Isn't imposter syndrome an interesting issue?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there are some people like yourself that I really look up to with the work that you're doing. And there's that little voice
Yep.
just squeaking away in certain situations. And certainly I've come to the conclusion that when that's going, I'm pushing myself outside my comfort zone.
Yep.
And my little voice is trying to protect me from danger. But
Yep.
actually, if we know it's not dangerous, we need to sort of say, go away. Actually, we can grow as people.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I used to tell the voice to go away, but my therapist told me to talk to it. So like
Oh,
listen to her. She's like, what is she telling you? Because exactly what you just said, she's trying to protect you, but then you have to dig deeper and say, what is she trying to protect me from? And then when you unpack it, you're like, oh, this is something that's actually gonna expand me. This is something that's going to, make me grow and develop, and that is where that fear comes from. There's an author I really like. Her name is Tara Moore. She wrote this book
oh
called
yes.
Playing Big. You know
Oh
when she
my,
talked about the difference between Yira and Prashad?
yeah.
Yeah.
I had just share it with the listeners, just in case anybody hasn't read this book.
Yeah, so I think Pashad is fear that comes from the unknown, and Yira is sort of the fear that comes from actually when you're growing and developing, or it could be the other way around. So don't quote me on this. But basically, there is a fear that you experience when you're growing and you're expanding, and that is not something you run away from. You sort of walk towards it and you listen to it. You sort of say, "Thank you. I understand what you're trying to do here. And I appreciate you for that, but you know what? I'm gonna go ahead with this." So yeah, it's interesting. Fear is not always a bad thing, and I think
No.
it's getting comfortable with fear and being able to move past it and say, okay, I'm still gonna go ahead and do this.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I talk about having my fear in my back pocket
Hmm.
because sometimes you need to be reminded
Yeah.
of danger, particularly if it's physical danger that
Hmm.
you could be in,
Yeah.
just so that you are always aware and you are in, you're playing your best game.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I can't believe we're going down this route. Interesting, isn't it? And the great thing about this book by Tara Moore is that she explains that there are various words in Hebrew for different
Hmm.
types of fear,
Yeah.
which we don't have in the English language.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a gift to hear.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so carry on.
No, I was just gonna say it's interesting you mentioned that because sometimes in my language, because my language is Hausa, so it's spoken in West Africa, so it's a West African tribe, and sometimes when I'm trying to, translate something into English, I'm like, wait, I don't think there's a word for that.
Make one up.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could do.
Definitely.
So, what are your three top tips? And I always ask this of my guests. What would your three top tips be
Hmm.
for building up an idea for people like me
Hmm.
to hear
Hmm.
about diversity and inclusion so
Hmm.
that we can learn?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would say first speak on topics you're familiar with, right? So diversity and inclusion is such a big space, but speak on specific parts of it that you feel comfortable with, because when you know your subject well, it flows a lot easier, and then you find it easy to be authentic because then you're not trying to be someone else or speak like someone else, and you can actually really bring in your own style. And I think when you can bring your own style, you actually end up enjoying it more, and then it's not so scary. Like whenever I'm building presentations, I'm thinking, okay, what sort of question am I going to ask? What polling question am I going to ask? What am I going to tell the audience to tell me? And I think when you're talking about something you're familiar with, you're focused less on, oh my God, I don't know what I'm talking about, because you do. So that's half the battle, right? So I think that's the first thing I would say. And then the other thing I'd say is practice, practice, practice. So I think communication is just one of those things that you need to keep doing to get better at, right? You can't only read about being a good communicator, you have to actually do it, right? So the first time I ever had to just read a story that I'd written in high school, I went up to the front of the class, I took a look at everyone, and then I ran out crying.
Oh, no. And look where you are now.
Yeah, and now I'm used to it. I still get nervous sometimes, but going back to what we said about the fear, I now realize that, oh, okay, that's normal, and this is something that I can cope with because I've done it before. Now, when you've done something before, it's almost like you're like, wait, why am I scared? I've done it before, and that didn't go so well because then you have the proof. But when
Yes.
you haven't done it, you don't have the proof, so it's like, oh goodness. So that's another tip. And I think the last one I would say is think about your end goal. So what do you want to be the outcome? Then when we think about, let's say, a meeting or a discussion, what do you want to be the outcome? And don't only think about yourself. So think about the other person or the other people in the room and what do they get out of it? So let's say when I go into a meeting with a customer, I'm not just thinking, hey, I'm going to sell them like my online course. So I have an online course on how to set up an employee network, right? So when I'm speaking to customers, I'm not just going in there thinking, great, I'm going to go tell them about the course and that's my main goal. No, my goal is to hear what they actually need and see if I can help them, whether that's through my product or through another way. But the end goal is how can I help them achieve their goals? And I think that's really important because people can sense when you just want to get something out of them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
True.
when you sort of approach it, and I think that also applies to networking as well, even though we're not talking about networking, but when you network, I think a lot of people will struggle with it because they're like, oh, I'm just asking people for stuff. And it's like, no, reframe it. Think about what you can offer them as well.
It's interesting. I've just been listening to a book on audio
Mhm.
about keeping your business small and the fact that if you are serving your customers, you are going to build relationships up. So you have um, shown that with what you said just now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, obviously, you are in the inclusion and diversity area.
Mhm.
What happens when somebody really doesn't like what your opinion is? Could you share that with the listeners? How would you approach it if somebody got very frustrated or angry with what your opinion was?
I think what I've learned to do is realize that sometimes people's reactions, especially when they're very extreme, it has nothing to do with me. By my comment, I've woken up something inside them. And
Yes.
sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with me, right? So we before the show we were talking about how when you call out maybe racist behavior, people automatically say, "Oh, you're calling me a racist," because they, don't want to think of themselves as a bad person. And then what you said is making them question their identity. Now, you've not called them a racist necessarily. You've said this particular thing you've done is racist, but they're having that extreme reaction because they're probably maybe feel a bit insecure around that. Maybe they are thinking that already about themselves. And then it's almost like you've come out and you've said that. And then it's like, oh no, I've been outed. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people have extreme reactions, I think it's best to learn when a reaction actually has to do with you and when it actually has nothing to do with you. And I guess that's another way of saying don't take it personal,
Yeah.
which can be hard in the moment. But I think this is where self-awareness comes in and, knowing yourself. And I think when you know yourself and you also really pay attention to the other person and listen and observe, you can pick up on that.
Yes.
Mhm.
What a mature attitude. Because you are absolutely right. And we were saying before we started recording that we all have our own personal map of the world, of our experiences. And we also have to be aware that other people have got their own perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is, everyone, exactly as you said, has their own perspective, right? And it's different from yours. So, you can give the information, how they choose to receive it is completely up to them. And sometimes when you give it to them in that moment, they may not receive it well. But see that person who's, had such a strong reaction, they might go and actually reflect and then come back to you and say, you know what, actually, you were completely right. I felt like that's happened to me before. I've mentioned to someone, okay, this what you said to me was racist and this is why it was racist. Here's an article, go read it. And they didn't react well at that time. They were like, oh, what are you trying to say about me and all of this stuff. And then actually I think 2 days later they reflected on it and they came to me and said, you know what, I'm really sorry, I actually had stuff going on in my personal life, something that had absolutely nothing to even do with inclusion, diversity, nothing, and they just brought that in. And the problems they were having had to do with a woman, and maybe because I was a woman, they decided to take it out on me. So that just taught me like, wow, okay, sometimes people react and it's not about me, it's about them. So yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your company and the online course that you have created.
Sure. So yeah, the inclusive culture started it because I think over the past couple of years, the top question I've probably gotten on LinkedIn is how did you start, the Black Employee Network? I want to start an employee network, whether it's, a women's network, LGBT, Asian, how do I get started? How do I get volunteers? And then I thought, you know what, I keep getting this, and I was like, I think I should just do something about it. So I decided last year I'm just going to create an online course on it. So I've created it, and it's an online course for anyone who wants to start an employee network. So from scratch. And it covers things like how do you get a sponsor? How do you get volunteers? How do you even structure it? Because my whole philosophy with employee networks is you need to run it like an organization,
Yes.
right? You structure it properly, you get the budget, you get the buy-in, you get the sponsorship. And the way I've designed it is it's about 5 modules, and all of my videos, there's probably about 4 to 5 videos in each module, and they're all 5 minutes or less.
Oh, really good.
Yeah, so there's exercises because I don't like talking at people, and I think I'm the same with presentations because with my presentations I try and keep my talking to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Max. And apparently with TED Talks, they're 18 minutes, and that's deliberate because that's how much people actually pay attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's 5 minutes or less. There's exercises, worksheets, and stuff people can work through, and then in one of my packages, people can join monthly coaching calls with me where I can just take their questions. So it's not like a presentation. It's just,
Yes.
hey, how's it going? What challenges are you having? How can I help? So yeah, that's about the course, and also focusing on working with organizations. So even if they have employee networks set up, then the conversation is all right. So how are you leveraging them? So are
Yeah.
you using them for recruitment? Are you working with them for talent retention? Are you working with them to develop your products and your services? So yeah.
That's amazing. And is it exclusively for minority groups, or is it for any type of group?
Any type of group. So the thing is, the way it's set up is any type of employee network you want to set up, women's, LGBT. And again, going back to my point about the similarities, when you're starting an employee network, you need the exact same things. The only difference is around your mission, obviously, and your goals, and who your goals are focused on. And actually, I think with employee resource groups, I think they should be separate in the sense that you shouldn't. I mean, you can, but I think when people can identify with the group, then you're
Yes.
more likely to get that buy-in. So have the different employee resource groups, but see if you can get them to work together. That is really important because intersectionality is so key, right? Because there are Black people who are also LGBT, who are also
Yeah.
women. There's white people who are trans, and then they might have a disability. So if you just sort of keep it separate, it's like, okay, but people are more than one thing, and that's a good thing.
That's a really, really good point. So, anybody listening, it might be that your organization desperately needs some employee groups. So, get in touch.
Yeah, go to theinclusiveculture.com. So that's my website. And yeah, you can contact me if you would like to have them set up.
Brilliant. And are you happy for people to contact you via LinkedIn as well?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Aisha Suleiman.
Okay, and I'll make sure that I've got a link in the notes for both your website and also your LinkedIn profile, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
And is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish?
Any last words? Yeah, I think last words would be organizations, please be proactive, don't be reactive. Don't wait until the next protest to,
Yeah.
affect change, because otherwise you're going to be in the same position, because this is a long-term effort, and we're working against years and years of, systematic oppression here. So it's going to take a lot of work, but you need to definitely be proactive on that. And I think for individuals, in terms of your communication as well, be proactive. So go out there, get those speaking engagements, start small and keep practicing. And yeah, telling your truth and sharing your story, because we all need to hear more stories.
What a brilliant way to end. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure. As I said at the beginning, I was really looking forward to meeting you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for having me on the show.
I'm sure you will agree that this was an amazing interview. In the notes for this particular podcast, I will make sure that all of Aisha's contact details are available to you, and please feel free to contact her. And so until next time, this is Susan from Superstar Communicator. Thanks for listening. You have been listening to the Superstar Communicator podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and review the podcast on iTunes and on apps. Please contact us if you want to discuss any topic, could suggest a topic for us to include, or a guest who could come onto the podcast. Go to superstarcommunicator.com.